Today, this is Anne. I want to cover the topic of a sign of the inner child, and that is triggers. I will cover signs in the way of beliefs and strategies. Now, triggers are the easiest way to know that there is an inner child present because triggers can be dramatic. They flood you with emotion of fear or sadness, like bursting into tears unexpectedly, or exploding out in anger, or feel the accumulation of anger happening in your body. Triggers happen when an adult is in a current situation that touches the wound that happened long ago in childhood. So, in a current situation, if someone turned his or her back to you while you are speaking, you feel insulted, dismissed, and it makes you angry. It touches the wound of your being rejected when you were very young, a memory that you probably don't have. But if you have a trigger like that, you can be sure that it is a wound showing up. So, what is important to know are how you can recognize these triggers. And I make it simple. It's using anger, fear, or sadness as a sign from the inner child that a wound has been touched. I want to include personal stories as well as stories of my client in this, so it's just not cut and dry. My experience with sadness was a surprise to me. I was probably 21 years old, and we were in California. I had just gotten married and were on our way to graduate school. We were saying goodbye to my parents who happened to be there, and we were in the car, and I suddenly burst into tears. I never experienced a parting like that, especially with my parents or any member of my family, with such sudden tears. Now, from this point of view, I recognize that it touched the wound of some kind of separation that I experienced way too early for me to remember. But it indicates now, looking back, that that was an inner child being touched. Another example for me is the only time, one of the few times I really felt anger. It was 6 years into my first marriage when my husband betrayed me. He came home and announced that we now had an open marriage, which in his mind gave him permission to carry on affairs with his students. I got angry. I was angry for 24 hours. I even remember beating on his chest, and he said to me, "You're not being rational." That got my attention because you see, I've been a debater for years, and rationality was the key. Not to mention, rationality was the theme of my life for decades and decades. So I stopped being emotional and I stopped the anger. This was one way in which I handled my anger very, in some ways, destructively for me. I buried my anger. And when I did that, I became unconscious. I disappeared more and more. So this is how triggers can show up. Sadness is about loss, and it can be loss of a person. And it's easy to see people crying at a sad movie, or people crying at some memorial or a funeral service, because they're remembering the love that was shared and now in physical form is not available to them. This too, unless it's an appropriate amount of sadness could be a trigger or not, depending on the individual. And if someone is crying on that day of death, or days later, or maybe weeks later, it can be natural. But if that sadness lingers on and on, like one of my former clients reported, her brother died suddenly a few months ago, and she is still grieving. So I believe that there's an inner child present that she needs to connect with and work through this loss. So triggers are important in that way, because it's a signal from an inner child that they are present and they hurt. When you do inner child work, any sign of an inner child is an opportunity for you to begin to connect to an inner child. Whatever method you use to connect, it's a beginning. And we'll talk about more complete responses to your inner child. So I can also say that besides triggers being a sudden flow of feelings through you, it can be chronic resentment, chronic mopiness, chronic fear, and the presence of a certain feeling like anger, resentment, bitterness, or sadness, mopiness, moodiness, or fear, even anxiety, can suggest the presence of an inner child, although it's not dramatic. The fact that it is there all the time is the important thing. And while I'm on the subject of emotions, with fear, anxiety to me is a special case, because people can get stuck in anxiety. Anxiety, I believe, is something you feel physiologically, and it alarms you so much so that you're trying to get rid of that anxiety. Now, that anxiety, again, to me, is a sign that something big is showing up, and it's a sign to distract you, like anger or sadness or even a fear. But the dread is of having that feeling is so strong. Anxiety shows up as a camouflage, a distraction. So you never feel what might seem worse to you. So anxiety takes special attention, especially since it engages the physiology of a person. Now, have I covered it all? All right. The point of describing these triggers to you is to let you know this is one way the inner child shows up. The other way is detecting beliefs that you have. And the third way are coping strategies that you have, all aspects of the inner child or trauma parts. Knowing about them is providing you an opportunity to reach out, face, embrace, be with, be present, have compassion, and have a process. So you use this hint, or as I call them, cries of the heart, to begin to align with your inner children, to align in such a way that you can embrace and heal them in the methods I will discuss in later videos. So now you know this, but you don't know the variety of fear, sadness, and anger that can come up, which will be in the next video. But again, these are signs of the inner child, so you know that you have been wounded very early in life. And these are the opportunities that come for you to see what is there, be curious, be present, and move to healing. This particular process I just described is an expression of a larger process that I encourage in my emotional reset or emotional intelligence part of my teaching with my clients, or encourage their practice as I work with people. And this is it. Any distress, any negative feeling, any upsetness is something not to run from, but it's something that you can meet and see that this means that all is not going well. And you have an opportunity to listen to the messages that are there, to align with your heart, and to work with your inner child to release the pain and the limiting beliefs and strategies that the trauma parts have. All right, we move next to an elaboration of the triggers of the inner child.